They called him Josiah, just another slave bent under the sun, forced to bow, beaten when he refused. But one night, broken and bleeding in the barn, his hand found the one thing his master trusted too much, a polished pistol, gleaming in the dark. At dawn, Colonel Rawlins dragged him out to be humiliated before the whole plantation. Instead, Josiah raised the stolen gun and pulled the trigger. The master fell dead in the dirt. The yard erupted. Chains smashed, cabins burst open, overseers fled as fire spread. Josiah, once silent, now led the revolt. But freedom bought with blood comes at a terrible price, because the master's brother commands an army. And every slave who dares follow Josiah must decide, will they escape to freedom or burn in the fire he's lit? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the cotton fields in shades of gold and shadow. Josiah's muscles ached as he hefted another heavy sack onto his shoulder. The rough burlap scratched against his sweat-soaked shirt, a constant reminder of the endless work that filled his days. Beside him, Isaac worked with the energy of youth, though his movements were careful, measured. Overseer Grady's horse kicked up dust as he circled the field. The crack of his whip split the air like thunder, followed by a sharp cry from somewhere down the row. "Move faster, you worthless dogs!" Grady's voice carried across the field, thick with spite and morning whiskey. Josiah kept his eyes down, focused on the white bowls that seemed to stretch forever into the distance. The heat was already building, and the air felt thick enough to chew. Around him, dozens of others worked in silence, their bodies moving in the familiar rhythm of survival. "They say there's word from Virginia," Isaac whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustle of cotton plants. "Slaves rising up, taking what's theirs." Josiah shot him a warning glance. "Hush now," he murmured. "That kind of talk gets people killed." His hands never stopped moving as he spoke, plucking cotton with practiced precision. He'd seen too many die from loose tongues and dreams of freedom. The memory of his wife, Sarah, rose unbidden in his mind. 7 years gone now, sold away when Rawlins needed money for gambling debts. Their children, too, scattered like seeds in the wind to other plantations. Some nights, Josiah still woke, thinking he heard their voices. "But how long we gonna live like this?" Isaac pressed, though he kept his voice low. "Ain't right. What they do to us. What they keep doing." Before Josiah could answer, Grady's horse thundered past again. They both fell silent, backs bent to their work. The sun climbed higher, and sweat ran in rivers down Josiah's back. His shoulders burned from the weight of the sacks, but he knew better than to slow down. The morning crawled by, marked only by the steady movement of shadows across the ground. Around midday, young Samuel, no more than 12, worked nearby, struggling with a basket almost as big as he was. Josiah watched from the corner of his eye, wanting to help, but knowing better than to draw attention. It happened in an instant. Samuel's foot caught on a root, and the basket tumbled from his grip. Cotton spilled across the dirt, and the boy's face went pale with terror. The sound drew Grady like a hawk to wounded prey. "Well, well," Grady sneered, wheeling his horse around. "Look what we have here!" He dismounted, grabbing Samuel by the scruff of his neck. The boy trembled, but didn't cry out, even as Grady's fingers dug into his skin. The other workers kept their heads down, but Josiah could feel the tension crackling through the air. His hands clenched involuntarily around the cotton he held. Then came the sound they all dreaded, the measured footsteps of fine boots through the dirt. Colonel Rawlins appeared, his white suit pristine despite the dust and heat. His silver pistol gleamed at his hip, a constant reminder of his power over life and death. "What seems to be the problem here?" Rawlins asked, his voice cultured and cruel. His eyes took in the spilled cotton, the trembling boy, and something like pleasure flickered across his face. "Boy needs to learn respect for property," Grady said, shaking Samuel roughly. Rollins nodded slowly, then turned his gaze to Josiah. "You there, Josiah." He spoke the name like it tasted bitter. "You're going to teach this boy a lesson." Josiah's stomach turned to ice. He knew what was coming. 10 lashes, Rollins continued, pulling his pistol from its holster and using it to gesture at the whip hanging from Grady's belt. "Show him what happens when you waste the master's time and money." Samuel's eyes met Josiah's, wide with fear and pleading. Around them, the other slaves stood frozen, barely breathing. Isaac took half a step forward but stopped when Josiah subtly shook his head. "No." The word left Josiah's mouth before he could stop it. Quiet, but clear as a bell in the humid air. Rollins raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" Josiah straightened his back, years of stored rage and pain crystallizing into a single moment of defiance. "I won't whip the boy." The pistol's grip crashed into Josiah's face with explosive force. He tasted blood as he staggered, but kept his feet. Rollins's face had turned red with fury. "Grady!" Rollins barked. "Take this one to the barn. Teach him what happens to slaves who forget their place." Grady's grin was savage as he grabbed Josiah's arm. The overseer's fingers dug into muscle as he dragged Josiah across the yard. Behind them, Josiah could hear Samuel's muffled sobs and Isaac's sharp intake of breath. The barn's darkness swallowed them. Grady's first blow caught Josiah in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The second split his lip. Then came the whip, each strike feeling like a line of fire across his back. Josiah lost count of the blows. His world narrowed to pain and the smell of blood and straw. When his legs finally gave out, he collapsed onto the barn floor. Through swollen eyes, he watched his own blood drip onto the packed earth. The last thing he heard before consciousness slipped away was Grady's boots on the barn floor, the overseer's satisfied chuckle echoing in the shadows. Then darkness took him, and Josiah fell into the mercy of unconsciousness. Night crept across the plantation like a thick blanket, bringing with it the chirp of crickets and the low hoot of owls. Inside the barn, Josiah lay on the blood-stained straw, his consciousness wavering between sharp pain and hazy dreams. Every breath sent daggers through his ribs, and his back felt like it had been set on fire. Moonlight sliced through the gaps between the barn boards, creating silver bars across the dirt floor. The light shifted as clouds drifted overhead, making shadows dance. In his fevered state, Josiah thought he saw Sarah standing in those shadows, reaching for him with ghostly hands. But when he blinked, she was gone. Just another trick of his tired mind. The barn creaked and settled around him. From his position on the floor, Josiah could see into the tack room through a gap in the wooden wall. The room was where Rollins kept his prized horse gear, gleaming bits and bridles worth more than any human life he owned. The moonlight caught something else in there, too, something that made Josiah's heart skip a beat. Rollins' pistol lay on the workbench, its silver surface reflecting the pale light. The master had been in earlier, fussing over his favorite mare, as if the animal was worth more than all his slaves combined. In his arrogance, he'd set the weapon down and walked away, probably assuming no slave would dare touch it. Josiah's whole body trembled, partly from pain and partly from the weight of what he was seeing. That pistol had been pressed against so many heads, had ended so many lives. It was power made solid, death given form, and it lay there, unguarded, like a terrible gift. Moving sent fresh waves of agony through his body, but Josiah forced himself to roll onto his stomach. The packed earth was cool against his face as he began to drag himself forward, inch by agonizing inch. Each movement pulled at the wounds on his back, and he had to clench his teeth to keep from crying out. The distance to the tack room seemed endless. Sweat dripped from his forehead, mixing with dried blood on the floor. Twice he had to stop. pressing his face against the dirt as waves of dizziness washed over him. But he kept going, driven by something deeper than thought, a desperate need to grasp that symbol of power, to hold it in his own hands. When he finally reached the tack room doorway, Josiah paused to catch his breath. His heart pounded so loud he was sure someone must hear it. But the night remained quiet, broken only by the distant bark of dogs and the rustle of wind through the trees. The workbench seemed miles high from his position on the floor. Josiah gathered what strength remained in his battered body and pulled himself up, using the bench's leg for support. His vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges, but he fought to stay conscious. His fingers, slick with sweat and blood, reached for the pistol. The metal felt cold and strange against his skin. Josiah had never held a gun before. Slaves caught with weapons faced immediate death. The weight of it surprised him, heavier than he'd expected. His hand shook as he wrapped his fingers around the grip, feeling the detailed engravings pressed into the metal. This was the weapon that had struck him earlier, that had threatened his people countless times. How many times had he seen Rawlins wave it around, using it to emphasize his orders or punishment? Now it lay in his own palm, its deadly promise his to command. Fear mixed with something else, a dark thrill that frightened him even more than the gun itself. Power. That's what he felt coursing through him, foreign and intoxicating. For the first time in his life, he held something that could make the masters afraid. Footsteps outside the barn snapped Josiah back to reality. Panic surged through him as he realized his vulnerable position. Still clutching the pistol, he dragged himself back to his spot on the floor. Every movement a fresh torment. The weapon felt like it was burning his hand, its presence screaming to be discovered. Just as the barn door creaked open, Josiah managed to stuff the pistol deep under the straw. He lay back, trying to slow his ragged breathing, trying to look as beaten and harmless as they expected him to be. The pistol pressed against his leg, hidden but impossible to forget. Grady's hulking form filled the doorway, a water bucket in his meaty hand. "Still alive, are you?" he sneered, walking closer. The overseer's boots stopped inches from Josiah's face. "Master says you need to live to learn your lesson proper." Josiah didn't respond, didn't move. He kept his eyes down as Grady set the bucket beside him with deliberate roughness, water sloshing onto the straw. The overseer's presence made the hidden pistol feel like a hot coal against Josiah's leg. "Drink up," Grady ordered. "Tomorrow you'll wish you'd died today." The water was warm and had a metallic taste, but Josiah's parched throat demanded it. He drank slowly, careful not to move in any way that might reveal the weapon beneath him. Each swallow helped clear his head, washing away some of the fever's fog. Grady watched him drink with obvious disappointment, probably hoping Josiah would be too weak to manage it. When the bucket was half empty, the overseer snatched it away and stomped out of the barn, slamming the door behind him. Alone again, Josiah lay in the darkness, one hand pressed against the straw where the pistol hid. The night deepened around him, the moon climbing higher in its arc across the sky. Hours crept by, marked only by the slow shift of shadows and the steady throb of pain in his wounds. As the deepest part of night settled over the plantation, Josiah remained awake, his mind racing with possibilities both terrible and wonderful. His fingers traced the outline of the hidden weapon, its presence both a comfort and a curse. The quiet before dawn filled the barn, broken only by his careful breathing and the weight of what was to come. The mist rolled thick across the plantation yard as dawn broke, clinging to the ground like ghostly fingers. Slaves shuffled into neat rows for morning roll call, their shadows long in the pale light. The air felt heavy with humidity and unspoken tension. Every face turned toward the barn as two overseers dragged Josiah into view. His shirt hung in bloody tatters, revealing the crisscross of fresh wounds across his back. Yet Josiah walked on his own feet, refusing to be fully carried. Each step was agony, but he kept his head high. The hidden pistol pressed against his ribs, concealed beneath what remained of his shirt. Colonel Rawlins stood on the porch of the main house, watching the assembly with cold eyes. He wore his finest morning coat despite the early hour, his silver hair neatly combed. The master descended the steps with deliberate slowness, letting his boots click against the wood. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Bring him forward," Rawlins commanded, gesturing to the space before him. The overseers shoved Josiah, making him stumble. He caught himself, straightened, and faced the master. Around them, the other slaves watched in tense silence. Isaac stood in the front row, his hands clenched into tight fists. "I trust you've had time to consider your foolishness," Rawlins said, loud enough for all to hear. "Defiance has consequences, as your back surely reminds you." He circled Josiah slowly, like a vulture sizing up dying prey. "But I am not without mercy. Kneel, apologize, and kiss my boot. And perhaps I'll let you keep all your teeth." Josiah didn't move. The pistol felt like it was burning against his skin, demanding action. His heart thundered in his chest, but his mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "I said kneel!" Rawlins bellowed, his face reddening. When Josiah remained standing, the master raised his hand to strike him. The world seemed to slow. Josiah's hand moved beneath his shirt, fingers wrapping around the familiar grip. The metal was warm now, like it had absorbed his body heat through the long night. He pulled the pistol free in one smooth motion. Rawlins's eyes widened as he recognized his own weapon. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For one frozen moment, master and slave stared at each other across the barrel of the gun. Josiah pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the yard like thunder. Rawlins jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his chest. His expensive coat darkened with blood as he stumbled, disbelief etched across his features. He took one halting step, reached toward Josiah with trembling fingers, then collapsed face first into the dirt. Silence fell, deep and complete. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Blood spread slowly around Rawlins's body, seeping into the dusty ground. The morning mist swirled around his still form as if trying to claim him. Someone screamed, a high, piercing sound that shattered the quiet. Chaos erupted instantly. Overseers scrambled for their weapons, but fear made them clumsy. Grady's horse reared, throwing him to the ground. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not looking back. Other overseers followed, abandoning their posts in blind panic. The slaves stood frozen for a heartbeat longer, generations of conditioning warring with the sight before them. Then Isaac's voice rang out, strong and clear. "The tools! Get the axes! Get the knives!" His words broke the spell. Men and women rushed toward the tool shed, toward the kitchen, toward anything that could become a weapon. Isaac himself seized a wood-splitting axe, raising it high. "Break the chains!" he shouted. "Break them all!" Josiah remained where he stood, the pistol still smoking in his hand. His back burned, his body ached, but he felt oddly distant from the pain. He watched, as if in a dream, as people ran past him, carrying makeshift weapons. Someone had found the overseer's whips and was snapping them in the air with wild abandon. "The cabins!" Josiah's voice surprised him with its strength. "Break the locks on the cabins! Free everyone!" The sounds of metal striking metal rang out as slaves attacked the chains and locks that had bound them. Children ran between the adults, some crying, others laughing with hysterical joy. An older woman spat on Rawlins's body as she hurried past, clutching a kitchen knife. More gunshots echoed from the direction of the overseer's quarters, but this time they were being fired by the freed slaves who had found the guards' abandoned weapons. Smoke began to rise from that direction, thick and black against the morning sky. Isaac appeared at Josiah's side, chest heaving, axe gleaming in his hands. "The stable boys saw the last overseers riding for town," he reported. "We need to move fast." Josiah nodded, finally lowering the pistol. His finger felt stiff on the trigger, reluctant to let go. He looked down at Rawlins's body, at the man who had held power over them for so long. In death, he seemed smaller somehow, just meat and cloth soaking in the dirt. The sound of breaking chains continued to ring across the plantation. More smoke rose into the sky as freed slaves set fire to the symbols of their bondage. Someone had found Rawlins's stores of whiskey, and bottles were being passed around, their contents used both for drinking and for feeding the flames. "Break everything!" Isaac shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "Break it all!" The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. It revealed a world transformed, slaves becoming warriors, tools becoming weapons, decades of fear becoming rage. The plantation yard, so orderly just moments before, had become a swirling scene of liberation and chaos. Josiah gripped the pistol tighter, feeling its weight anew. This wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was the key that had unlocked their chains, the spark that had lit this fire. Around him, the first moments of revolt blazed like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as thick black smoke billowed from the burning overseer quarters. The air was heavy with ash and the metallic tang of broken chains. Everywhere Josiah looked, the formerly enslaved moved with desperate purpose, their actions guided by decades of suppressed fury finally unleashed. "Over here!" Isaac called out, leading a group of men with sledgehammers toward the locked storage shed. The heavy doors splintered under their combined assault, revealing racks of tools and restraints. They emerged carrying armfuls of weapons, machetes meant for sugarcane, heavy iron tools, and even a few rusty muskets. Josiah watched from the yard, the colonel's pistol still warm in his grip. Around him, people who had spent their lives with eyes downcast now moved with straight backs and raised chins. An elderly woman named Martha shuffled past, clutching papers from the main house. "Burning every last record," she declared, her voice trembling with emotion. "Every sale, every child took from their mama. All of it goes into the fire." Samuel, the young boy whose dropped basket had sparked yesterday's confrontation, stayed close to Josiah's side. His small hand gripped the edge of Josiah's tattered shirt. "They won't ever sell us again, will they?" he asked, his young face serious. "No," Josiah answered firmly, though his heart clenched at the weight of that promise. "Never again." The big house's wide veranda echoed with footsteps as groups moved in and out, stripping it of weapons, supplies, and anything of value. In the study, ledgers and ownership papers fed a growing bonfire. The flames consumed generations of carefully documented cruelty, turning the records of their bondage to ash. From Rawlins's desk, Josiah pocketed a leather pouch of pistol balls and powder, enough to keep the weapon fed. Near the slave cabins, the sound of breaking metal rang out as men attacked the chains and locks that had confined their families. Women emerged carrying bundles of food and clothing, distributing supplies with the efficiency born from years of secret organization. Rachel, heavy with child, was given the softer bedding and 2 steady hands to walk beside her. "Josiah!" Isaac's voice cut through the chaos. He jogged over, wiping sweat from his brow. They fought back. His tone made it clear how that confrontation had ended. 3 overseers tried hiding in the tobacco barn, Grady among them. They fought back. Josiah nodded grimly. Every death weighed on him, but there could be no half measures now. They had crossed a line that morning when he'd pulled the trigger. Their only path led forward. "Get everyone fed," he instructed. "We'll need our strength." Isaac nodded and moved off, shouting orders with natural authority. Samuel tugged at Josiah's shirt again. "I want to help, too," the boy insisted. "I can carry things, or be a lookout?" Josiah studied the child's eager face, remembering his own lost youth in these fields. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay within sight of the big house, you hear? No wandering." The boy beamed and scampered off to join a group of women organizing supplies on the veranda. Josiah watched him go, trying to ignore the knot of worry in his gut. Samuel's generation deserved more than another life of fear. As the afternoon wore on, the initial frenzy of liberation settled into purposeful industry. Those with medical knowledge tended to the injured. Others organized weapons and provisions. A few with military experience from their previous plantations began teaching basic fighting stances to those who'd never held a weapon. The sun was low in the sky when Josiah climbed to the big house's second floor. From this vantage point, he could see the full scope of their revolt. Smoke rose from multiple points across the plantation. The neat rows of the cotton fields stretched to the horizon, now empty of workers. The overseer quarters still smoldered, its ruins a testament to their first act of vengeance. Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Isaac's arrival. "The fields are clear," he reported. "Every cabin's been opened. We've got about 200 people all told, counting those who slipped over from neighboring plantations when they heard the news." Josiah turned to respond, but movement at the edge of the property caught his eye. 3 figures were running toward the house, the scouts they'd sent out that morning. Their speed spoke of urgent news. He hurried down to meet them in the yard. The scouts doubled over, gasping for breath in the evening air. The eldest, a man named Marcus, straightened up first. "Riders," he panted. "We saw them on the main road to town. At least 6 men pushing their horses hard. They'll have reached the town by now." "Did you recognize any of them?" Josiah demanded. "Yes," Marcus nodded grimly. "They'll be running straight to Captain Edward Rawlins, the colonel's brother." A heavy silence fell over the gathered crowd. Everyone knew of Edward Rawlins, the militia leader who had made his reputation crushing slave revolts in neighboring counties. Where his brother had been cruel but predictable, the captain was known for his cold efficiency in dealing with resistance. "How long?" Isaac asked, his voice tight. "If he musters the militia right away," Marcus calculated, "they could be here by tomorrow afternoon." The last rays of sunlight painted the sky blood red as night approached. Josiah looked down at the pistol in his hand, the weapon that had started all of this. Its polished surface reflected the dying light, and he could still see traces of powder burns from the morning's fatal shot. Around him, people who had just begun to taste freedom now huddled in worried groups, whispering among themselves. In the distance, a baby cried. Samuel stood at the edge of the veranda, his earlier excitement replaced by wide-eyed fear. The weight of their situation pressed down like a physical force. This morning's victory had felt complete, but now Josiah understood. They had only struck the first blow in a much larger battle. Whatever army the captain brought would come with one purpose: to make an example of them all. Darkness crept across the plantation as the sun vanished behind the trees. In the shadows, their hard-won kingdom suddenly felt very small and very fragile. Dawn broke over the Rawlins plantation, revealing the aftermath of yesterday's uprising. Thick smoke still curled from the ruins of the overseer quarters, and the morning air carried the bitter scent of ash and gunpowder. In the far corner of the property, near the old oak trees, a group of men worked silently with shovels, digging shallow graves for their fallen. 3 of their own had died in the initial fighting: elderly Thomas, who'd been caught in the crossfire, young Mary, who'd tried to protect the children, and James, who'd faced down an overseer's shotgun. They laid them to rest with quiet prayers and covered them with earth still wet with morning dew. Josiah stood watching the burial, the colonel's pistol heavy in his waistband. Isaac approached, his face streaked with dirt and fatigue. "We've got all the survivors from the white quarters rounded up in the barn," Isaac reported. "Most are field hands and house servants, but—" He hesitated. We found Mrs. Rawlins and her boy hiding in the cellar. Josiah's jaw tightened. The widow's alive? Hasn't said a word since we found her. Just holds on to that boy of hers like she thinks we're going to snatch him away. They walked together toward the barn, their boots crunching on scattered debris. Inside, about a dozen white faces looked up fearfully from where they sat against the wall. In the corner, Abigail Rawlins crouched in her torn silk dress, arms wrapped protectively around her 7-year-old son, Theodore. The boy's face was tear-streaked but quiet, pressed against his mother's shoulder. Abigail's usually perfect hair hung in tangles around her face, but her eyes were sharp and calculating as they followed Josiah's movement. "Everyone out!" Josiah ordered the other prisoners. "Into the yard." As they shuffled past under guard, he approached the widow slowly. "Mrs. Rawlins," she lifted her chin, some of her old plantation mistress dignity returning. "You murdered my husband. Your husband murdered plenty before yesterday." Josiah's voice was flat. "You saw it yourself, and never spoke a word." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or simply fear. She pulled Theodore closer. "What do you plan to do with us?" Before Josiah could answer, Samuel burst into the barn. "Riders coming! From the East Road!" Isaac grabbed his shoulder. "How many?" "Just 2, Samuel panted. "Looked like scouts." A murmur went through the gathered rebels. Everyone knew what scouts meant. The militia was testing their defenses, preparing for attack. "They'll be here by tomorrow," Abigail spoke suddenly. "My brother-in-law won't waste time once he hears what's happened." Josiah turned back to her. "And how many men will the good captain bring?" "I could tell you." Her voice dropped lower. "I could tell you exactly how many rifles he has, which routes he'll take, even where he'll make camp tonight. Edward always follows the same patterns." Isaac spat on the ground. "She's lying to save her skin." "No." Abigail's fingers whitened where they gripped her son's shoulders. "I'm offering a trade. My boy's life, and mine, for information that could save yours." Martha, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, stepped forward. "Kill them both," she said, her voice shaking. "That boy will grow up to be just like his father." Theodore began to cry softly, and Abigail pressed his face against her chest. "He's innocent," she pleaded. "And I know things you need to know. Edward trained his militia for years. I listened at dinner parties, heard all their plans for putting down slave revolts. I know their weaknesses." Josiah studied her face carefully. In all his years on the plantation, he'd seen Abigail Rawlins watch countless punishments without flinching. She'd ordered whippings herself for minor infractions from her house servants. But he'd also seen her slip extra food to pregnant women and prevent her husband from selling young children away from their mothers. "Why should we trust you?" he asked. "Because I'm a mother." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I'll do anything to keep my son alive. And because I know that if Edward reaches this plantation, he'll kill everyone, even the children. He's not like his brother. He doesn't believe in leaving witnesses." The barn fell silent except for Theodore's muffled sobs. Josiah felt the weight of eyes on him. Isaac's suspicious glare, Martha's vengeful stare, Samuel's confused gaze. The power to decide life or death sat uncomfortably in his hands. "Bind her hands," he finally ordered. "The boy stays with her. Keep them under guard, but away from the other prisoners." "Josiah," Isaac protested, "you can't." "We need what she knows," Josiah cut him off. "But that doesn't mean we trust her." Abigail allowed herself to be bound without resistance, though she flinched when the rope bit into her wrists. Theodore clung to her skirts as they were led outside into the morning light. The rebels were already breaking camp, preparing to move deeper into the plantation's territory. Smoke from the smoldering buildings would help mask their movement from any watching scouts. Groups of people packed supplies, gathered weapons, and formed lines to march. "Walk," Josiah told Abigail, pointing toward the distant cotton fields. She took her son's hand and fell into step beside him, her silk slippers already staining with mud. As they moved across the yard, Josiah caught fragments of worried whispers from the rebels around them. Some praised his mercy, others condemned his weakness. He kept his hand near the colonel's pistol, watching Abigail's every movement. The widow's face remained carefully blank as she walked, but her eyes darted constantly between the armed rebels, calculating. Her fingers never loosened their grip on Theodore's small hand. Whether she was truly a mother, desperate to save her child, or a snake waiting to strike, Josiah couldn't be certain. But he knew that keeping her alive was a gamble they had to take. The morning sun climbed higher as the long line of rebels wound their way toward the cotton field, disappearing into the protective haze of smoke that still hung over the plantation. Behind them, the big house stood empty, its windows dark and accusatory in the growing light. The noon sun beat down mercilessly as Josiah walked the edge of the river crossing, studying the ground where the water ran shallow. Behind him, the sound of metal striking metal rang out as the rebels turned farm tools into weapons. Years of working this land had taught him every dip and rise, knowledge that might now save their lives. "The water's lowest here," he explained to Isaac, who followed close behind. "They'll try to bring horses across at this point." He jabbed a stick into the muddy bank. "We dig trenches here and here. Hide spikes in the approach." Isaac nodded, already calling over a group of men. "Samuel, bring those shovels!" Marcus, quiet and fox-cunning, took the eastern road to watch for dust. The boy darted forward, dragging tools almost too big for his thin frame. His eagerness to help shone in his eyes, undimmed by fear or exhaustion. "I want to scout the road again," Samuel said, bouncing on his toes. "I can climb the tall oak and see for miles." Josiah placed a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. "Later. First, help the men dig." He couldn't bear the thought of Samuel facing militia rifles alone in the woods. Across the clearing, Matilda led a group of women in sharpening hoes and scythes against whetstones. The metallic scraping matched the fury in her eyes. Timothy, broad-shouldered and gentle, lifted barrels like they were empty, his strength a quiet reassurance. She'd lost 3 children to the auction block over the years. Now her hands shaped weapons with terrible purpose. "These'll cut deep enough," she said, as Josiah passed, testing a blade's edge with her thumb. "Just like harvesting season, except the crop's different now." Near the temporary camp they'd established, Abigail sat under guard, her son Theodore asleep with his head in her lap. Maps drawn from memory lay scattered around her, detailed sketches of every road and trail within 20 miles. "The militia will come down the main road first," she said, as Josiah approached. "It's the only way to move large numbers quickly. But Edward knows these woods. He'll send smaller groups through here and here." Her finger traced lines on the crude maps. "How many men?" Josiah demanded. 50 in the main force. Perhaps 20 more he can call up from the neighboring plantations." She looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes clear. "They have rifles, military training." "We have desperation," Josiah replied coldly, "and better reason to fight." Throughout the afternoon, the work continued. Isaac drilled the younger men in fighting stances, teaching them how to turn familiar tools into deadly weapons. "A hoe can kill just as easy as a sword," he shouted. "Swing from the hips, not the arms." The sounds of practice fights filled the air, wood clacking against wood as they sparred with makeshift staves. Those who had seized rifles from the overseers practiced loading and firing, precious ammunition strictly rationed. Samuel, finally allowed to scout, scrambled up trees at the edge of their position, reporting every rider or distant dust cloud he spotted. His small size and quick feet made him nearly invisible in the branches. "2 men rode past on the far road," he reported breathlessly after one mission, "heading toward town. They didn't see me." Josiah kept moving between groups, checking defenses, settling arguments, trying to turn 300 scattered slaves into something like an army. The colonel's pistol remained at his waist, a constant reminder of how everything had changed. When Abigail called him over again, he found her sketching in the dirt with a stick. Detailed drawings of militia formations she'd seen during training exercises. "They'll put their best shots here," she explained, marking positions. Behind the rifles, men with sabers for close fighting. Edward believes in overwhelming force. "And where would you put our people?" Josiah asked, testing her. She didn't hesitate. "Split them. Small groups in the trees on both sides. When the militia bunches up at the river crossing, attack from 3 directions. Don't let them form proper lines." It was sound advice, exactly what Josiah had planned. He studied her face, searching for signs of deception. "Why are you really helping us?" "I told you. My son." She stroked Theodore's hair as he slept. "And perhaps I've seen enough death." As evening approached, campfires began to flicker to life. The rebels gathered in small groups, sharing meager rations and whispered prayers. Tomorrow would bring blood, and everyone felt the weight of that knowledge. Josiah sat apart, watching the flames cast dancing shadows. Across the fire, Abigail fed Theodore small pieces of cornbread, her bound hands making the task awkward. The firelight made her face a mask of shifting light and darkness. Isaac dropped down beside Josiah, his voice low. "I still say we can't trust her." "We don't have to trust her," Josiah replied. "Just use what she knows. And if she's lying? If every word is meant to trap us?" Josiah didn't answer. He watched Abigail through the flames, this woman who had been part of their oppression for so long. Now she sat in the dirt among those she had helped enslave, her fine dress ruined, her future as uncertain as theirs. The night grew deeper. Guards took their positions along the perimeter. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere far off, a dog barked, perhaps from one of the neighboring plantations where news of the uprising had surely spread. Abigail's face floated in the firelight like a pale moon, her eyes reflecting the flames when she glanced his way. Josiah's hand rested on the pistol that had started all this, and he wondered if in sparing her he had invited destruction into their fragile dream of freedom. The first light of dawn painted the sky in pale gray when Samuel came crashing through the underbrush, chest heaving. Josiah grabbed the boy before he could stumble. "They're coming!" Samuel gasped, pointing back toward the road. "At least 40 men on horseback, more on foot behind them." Josiah squeezed the boy's shoulder. "You did good. Get to your position now." Samuel nodded and darted away into the shadows. The rebels moved silently to their hiding places along the river bank, just as they'd practiced. The morning mist hung low over the water, thick enough to blur shapes, but not hide them completely. Josiah crouched behind a fallen log, feeling the weight of the colonel's pistol against his hip. Isaac settled beside him, gripping a sharpened scythe. "Should we signal Matilda's group yet?" "Wait," Josiah whispered. "Let them get halfway across first." Minutes crawled by like hours. The sound of hooves grew closer, accompanied by the jingle of military tack and low voices. Through gaps in the mist, Josiah caught glimpses of blue uniforms and polished rifles. Proper soldiers, not just plantation militia. The first riders reached the water's edge. An officer raised his hand, studying the crossing. "Seems clear enough. First squad, forward." Horses splashed into the shallows. Josiah held his breath, counting. 10 men across, 15, 20. "Now," he hissed. On both banks, rebels heaved against rope lines. Massive logs they'd positioned upstream broke free, rolling and splashing into the water. Horses reared in panic as the logs crashed into their legs. Riders tumbled into the churning water. "Fire!" Josiah shouted. Flaming arrows arced from the trees where Matilda's group waited. They struck horses and men alike, adding chaos to the confusion. Screams filled the air as animals bolted, throwing more riders. "Charge!" Isaac's voice boomed across the water. He leaped up, scythe glinting, leading a wave of rebels armed with farm tools turned deadly. Josiah raised the pistol and fired. An officer fell from his saddle, clutching his chest. The rebels crashed into the disordered militia like a storm. Isaac's scythe swept a soldier's legs from under him. Armed with hoes, axes, and captured rifles, the rebels fought with desperate fury. Matilda appeared through the mist like an avenging spirit, a knife in each hand. She ducked under a saber swing and opened a soldier's throat. "This is for my children!" she screamed, already moving to her next target. The militia's formation had completely broken. Those still mounted tried to retreat, but their horses slipped on the hidden spikes Josiah's men had planted. Foot soldiers found themselves isolated, surrounded by people they'd once thought helpless. Samuel darted between the fighting, small and quick, tripping soldiers with a rope. When one turned to grab him, Isaac's scythe ended the threat. The boy's face was fierce with determination as he moved to help others. "Fall back!" someone shouted from the militia's ranks. "Fall back to the road!" But retreat meant crossing the turbulent water again, where more logs tumbled downstream. Horses thrashed in panic. Men trying to wade across found themselves swept off their feet. Josiah reloaded the pistol with practiced moves, just as he'd trained himself to do. Another shot, another officer down. The weapon that had started their revolt was still dealing death. More rebels poured from the tree line, armed with pruning hooks and torch-tipped spears. They had been slaves yesterday. Now they fought like warriors. The militia's remaining lines crumbled under the onslaught. "Run!" The cry went up among the soldiers. "Run for your lives!" Those who could fled back the way they'd come, leaving weapons and wounded behind. Others surrendered, throwing down their arms and begging mercy. The water ran red with blood, carrying fallen men and horses downstream. When the last shot faded, and strange silence fell over the battlefield, then someone started cheering. The sound spread like fire through dry grass until hundreds of voices filled the morning air with triumph. Isaac grabbed Josiah in a fierce embrace. "We did it! By God, we actually did it!" Matilda stood on the river bank, bloodied but unbowed, raising her knives to the sky. Former house servants, who'd never held a weapon before yesterday, wept and laughed at once, hardly believing their victory. Samuel ran up to Josiah, eyes shining. "Did you see? Did you see how we beat them?" "I saw." Josiah ruffled the boy's hair, his heart full of pride and wonder. They gathered the wounded, their own first, then the militia's survivors. Weapons were collected, ammunition counted. The rebel dead would be buried with honor, their sacrifice marked with wooden crosses. Josiah walked the battlefield as the sun climbed higher, smoke from the spent firearms still hanging in the air. Bodies lay scattered across the blood-soaked ground. Men who'd thought their uniforms and rifles made them invincible, broken by the fury of the enslaved. He found Isaac organizing teams to drag the dead horses from the river. His friend's face was scratched and bruised, but his eyes blazed with fierce joy. "We lost 8 of ours," Isaac reported, "but we killed at least 20 of theirs and captured a dozen more. Plus their weapons," he grinned. "Not bad for a bunch of field hands, eh?" Josiah nodded, looking across the carnage. The rising sun burned away the last of the mist, revealing the full scope of their victory. Cheers still echoed from different parts of their position as rebels discovered new trophies or reunited with friends they'd feared lost. For the first time since he'd stolen the pistol, Josiah felt more than just desperate hope. They had faced trained soldiers and won. Freedom wasn't just a dream anymore. It was possible, real, within reach. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the rebel camp transformed from a battlefield into something close to a celebration. Cooking fires dotted the grounds, the aroma of roasting meat mixing with wood smoke. They'd raided the plantation storehouse, bringing out preserved hams and barrels of wine that had once been forbidden. Children darted between the fires, playing games with newfound freedom. Their laughter, so rare before, rang out like music. Samuel led a group in a game of chase, their bare feet kicking up dust as they ran. Josiah sat on an upturned barrel, the colonel's pistol still at his side. He watched Matilda teaching younger women how to clean the captured rifles, her movements precise and patient. Near the main fire, older men who'd spent decades in the fields told stories of their homelands, voices strong with pride instead of whispers. "Here!" Isaac appeared beside him, offering a tin cup of wine. "You earned this today." Josiah took a slow sip, savoring the rich taste. "Never thought I'd drink the master's wine. Never thought we'd do any of this." Isaac settled beside him, gesturing at the scene before them. "Look at them, Josiah. Really look. When's the last time you saw joy like this?" A group had started singing, old songs from Africa mixed with spirituals, but now the words rang with triumph instead of sorrow. Some danced, their shadows long in the firelight. Even the wounded joined in, clapping from their makeshift beds. "Makes it worth it, doesn't it?" Isaac continued. "All the blood, all the fear. Worth it to see them free, even if just for tonight." Josiah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. He watched Samuel teaching younger children how to make shadow puppets on a stretched blanket. The boy had grown years older in days, but now his smile was that of a child again. The celebration continued as darkness fell. Stars appeared above them, witnesses to their brief taste of liberty. Someone found a fiddle in the big house, and its notes soared above the singing. Then screams cut through the music. Josiah leaped up, pistol drawn. Through the darkness came the sound of horses and men shouting. A patrol of rebels burst from the trees, dragging someone, behind them. "They got Isaac!" one of them yelled. "The militia caught him chasing stragglers." The celebration shattered. Women grabbed children, pulling them back. Men reached for weapons. Josiah pushed through the crowd, heart pounding. Isaac lay in the dirt, bloody and bound. Militia troops emerged from the darkness, torches casting cruel light on their faces. They dragged Isaac to his knees. "Josiah!" A captain stepped forward, brass buttons gleaming. "We know you're their leader. Surrender now, or watch him suffer." The rebels raised their weapons, but the militia had positioned themselves well, too far for accurate fire in the dark, using Isaac as a shield. Josiah's hand tightened on the pistol. "Don't you dare!" Isaac shouted, earning a rifle butt to his face. Blood streamed from his nose. "Don't give them anything." The captain smiled coldly. Perhaps some motivation. He nodded to his men. They began with Isaac's fingers, breaking them one by one. His screams echoed across the camp. Children cried, hidden in their mothers' skirts. Samuel tried to run forward, but Matilda held him back. "Stop!" Josiah's voice cracked. "Please!" "Surrender," the captain repeated. "Order your people to lay down arms." Isaac spat blood. "Never surrender. We die free or not at—" A boot to his ribs cut off his words. They moved to his legs next, methodically working up from his feet. Isaac's screams became wet, desperate sounds. The rebels watched in helpless horror, weapons shaking in their hands. Josiah looked at his friend's face, saw the agony there, and underneath it, a plea. Isaac's eyes met his, and in them was the same look they'd shared countless times across the fields. Understanding passed between them. Josiah raised the pistol. "Last chance," the captain warned. "I'm sorry, brother," Josiah whispered. The shot cracked across the night. Isaac's body slumped forward, death bringing mercy where life had none. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. The captain's smile faltered. He hadn't expected this. Before he could speak, shadows moved in the trees behind him. Rebels who'd circled during the torture emerged, weapons ready. "Clear out." Josiah's voice was ice. "Or join him in the ground." The militiamen, outnumbered now, backed away. They melted into the darkness, leaving Isaac's body behind. The moment they were gone, Josiah fell to his knees beside his friend. Others rushed forward, Matilda with bandages she wouldn't need, Samuel with tears streaming down his face. They gathered around the fallen man who had taught them to fight, to hope. "Riders coming!" The shout came from the perimeter. "Fast!" Two scouts burst into the firelight, faces gray with fear. "We counted hundreds," one gasped. "Regular army mixed with militia. They've got cannon with them, too. They're less than half a day's march from here." The news rippled through the camp. The celebration fires seemed to dim, smoke turning thick and choking. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men who'd been dancing minutes ago now gripped their weapons with white-knuckled hands. Josiah remained kneeling beside Isaac's body, the pistol heavy in his hand. Around him, the night pressed in, bringing with it the cold certainty that their brief taste of freedom had cost them more than they could bear. The smoke from their fires rose into the starless sky, carrying with it the last echoes of their celebration. In its place settled a silence heavy with despair, broken only by muffled sobs and the distant rumble of approaching drums. Dawn crept over the rebel camp like a sickly gray shroud. The morning mist clung to the ground, turning familiar shapes into haunting shadows. Josiah hadn't slept. He'd spent the night sitting beside Isaac's fresh grave, the turned earth still dark and wet. Around him, the camp stirred with nervous energy. What had been unity just days ago now splintered like dry wood. Small groups huddled together, whispering, casting furtive glances at their neighbors. Fear had worked its way into their midst, like poison. "We should run for the swamps," Marcus, an older field hand, argued to anyone who would listen. "My grandfather lived there for years after escaping. Said there's places the white men can't follow." Others shook their heads. "The swamps'll kill us just as sure as bullets," Deborah countered, her face lined with worry. "Snakes, gators, fever. And what about the children?" Near the remains of last night's fires, a group of younger men gathered around Thomas, one of the stronger fighters. "We should take the fight to them," he insisted, brandishing a captured rifle. "Hit the town before they expect it. Burn their homes like they burned ours." The arguments grew louder, spreading through the camp like wildfire. Some began packing what little they had, while others sharpened weapons. Samuel darted between groups, his young face creased with concern, as he reported the growing divisions to Josiah. Matilda approached, her usual strength tempered by exhaustion. "They're scared, Josiah." "Without Isaac," she trailed off, pain flickering across her features. "We need direction. We need hope." Josiah stared at the pistol in his hands, the weapon that had started it all, that had ended Isaac's suffering. Its weight felt impossibly heavy now. "What hope can I give them? I led us here, got Isaac killed, brought an army down on our heads. You gave us freedom," Matilda insisted. "Even if just for a few days we tasted it. That's more than most ever get." A commotion near the edge of camp drew their attention. Two groups were squared off, shoving and yelling. One man raised a hoe threateningly. "Enough!" Josiah's voice cracked across the morning air. The fighters separated, but the tension remained thick as soup. Abigail Rawlins emerged from her guarded tent, her young son clutching her skirts. Despite her captivity, she carried herself with careful dignity. "May I speak with you, Josiah? Alone?" Several rebels moved to object, but Josiah waved them off. He followed her to the edge of camp, keeping careful distance. Thomas trailed them, rifle ready. "Your people are fracturing," she said without preamble. "By nightfall they'll either scatter or turn on each other. Then the militia will hunt them down one by one." "Speaking from experience, Mrs. Rawlins?" Josiah's voice was bitter. "Speaking from strategy." She met his gaze steadily. "You want to save them? There's only one way now. Burn it all. Burn what? The cotton, the fields, all of it. She gestured to the vast white expanse stretching to the horizon. That's what they're really fighting for. Not us, not revenge. The cotton. It's harvest season. Every plantation owner for 50 miles has sunk their fortune into these fields. Josiah studied her face, looking for the lie. And burning it helps us how? It creates chaos, panic. Every slave owner, every militiaman, they'll rush to protect their own fields first. The army will split up, trying to prevent the fires from spreading. Her voice grew urgent. Use the confusion. Lead your people north. The Underground Railroad has a station 2 days hard march from here. And I should trust you because my son is watching. Her voice cracked slightly. Because he needs to see that not all of us are monsters. Josiah turned away, looking over the camp. The arguments had grown louder. 2 more fights had broken out. Soon, blood would be spilled, but this time, by their own hands. Samuel appeared at his elbow. Scouts say the army's getting closer. They've got dogs with them now. The boy's words settled like stones in Josiah's stomach. Dogs meant they'd be tracked, no matter where they ran. The swamps wouldn't save them. The town would be suicide. He walked slowly back to Isaac's grave, knees sinking into the soft earth. The morning mist had begun to burn away, revealing a sky as blank and merciless as a slaver's heart. "I'm sorry, brother," he whispered to the ground. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I had to be the one to end it." His fingers traced the rough cross they'd fashioned from broken fence posts. "But I promise you this. Your death won't be for nothing. These chains will break, whatever it costs." The pistol lay heavy against his leg. 6 days ago, he'd been just another field hand, keeping his head down, enduring. Now he was a killer, a leader, perhaps a dead man walking. But he was free. They all were, and maybe that was worth any price. He thought of Isaac's fierce grin when they'd won the river battle, remembered Samuel's laughter during last night's brief celebration, saw again the faces of children tasting freedom for the first time. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the distant road. Time was running out. More arguments erupted behind him, the fractures growing deeper with each passing moment. Josiah rose from the grave, dirt staining his knees. The weight of every decision, every death, pressed down on him. But his back remained straight. He turned toward the camp, toward the waiting faces of people who'd trusted him this far. They would burn it all, and in the flames, perhaps they'd forge a path to something better than chains. Midnight draped the plantation in velvet darkness. The cotton fields stretched endlessly, their white bowls ghostly under the stars. Josiah stood at the edge of the field, watching his people slide between the rows like shadows. Each carried something burning: torches, oil lamps, smoldering branches. They moved with the quiet precision learned from years of secret meetings and whispered plans. Matilda appeared at his side, a blazing torch in her weathered hands. "The young ones are ready by the north field. Thomas has the west." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Once it starts, there's no going back." Josiah nodded, feeling the weight of the pistol against his hip. The same weapon that had started this revolt would now signal its desperate gambit. Behind them, the remaining rebels waited with the children and what few supplies they'd gathered. The night air felt thick, expectant. Samuel crouched nearby, his small frame tense with anticipation. "I can see the militia campfires," he reported. "They're spread out, just like Mrs. Rollins said they'd be." The mention of Abigail made Josiah's jaw tighten. She stood under guard near the back of their group, her son clutching her skirts. Even now, he couldn't read the truth in her pale face. A night bird called, their signal that the last scouts were in position. Josiah raised the pistol, pointing it skyward. The metal gleamed dully in the starlight. One shot would unleash hell itself. He thought of Isaac, of all they'd lost to reach this moment. His finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot cracked across the night like thunder. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the world erupted in flames. Fire roared to life in dozens of places, hungry tongues licking up the dry cotton stalks. The rebels touched their torches to the base of each row, and the flames raced through the field like living things. Smoke billowed upward, thick and choking. Shouts of alarm rose from the militia camps. Horses whinnied in panic. Through the growing inferno, Josiah saw men running in confusion, their shadows dancing against the red-lit sky. "Now!" he bellowed. "Move!" The rebels surged forward, using the smoke as cover. They'd chosen their path carefully, a gap between two militia positions, where the confusion would be greatest. Thomas led the charge, rifle ready. Behind him came the others, helping the elderly and carrying the smallest children. The fire spread faster than anyone had imagined. Heat blasted their faces as they ran. The smoke turned the world into a hellish twilight, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Someone screamed in the distance. Whether friend or foe, Josiah couldn't tell. Gunshots erupted sporadically, but the militia fired blind through the smoke. Most of their shots went wide. Somewhere behind the smoke, cannon crews shouted, but the wind and flames made their guns useless. The rebels pressed on, coughing, eyes streaming. The crackle of burning cotton filled the air like devil's music. "Keep together!" Josiah shouted over the roar of the flames. "Follow Thomas!" A militiaman loomed suddenly through the smoke, raising his rifle. Matilda struck him down with a hoe before he could fire. They pushed past his body without stopping. The fire had taken on a life of its own now. It jumped from field to field, creating a wall of flames that stretched to the horizon. The dry summer had left the cotton perfect for burning. Waves of heat distorted the air, making the world shimmer like a fever dream. More shouts came from behind them, orders being given, men trying to organize in the chaos, but the flames had done their work. The militia was scattered, each man more concerned with protecting his own property than hunting slaves. They'd covered perhaps half a mile when Samuel tugged urgently at Josiah's sleeve. "The guards!" he gasped through the smoke. "Mrs. Rawlins! She's gone!" Josiah spun around. Through gaps in the smoke, he could see the plantation house silhouetted against the burning sky. And there, in an upper window, a lantern flashed in a steady pattern. In the first panic of the fire, Abigail slipped her rope against broken glass and vanished toward the house with Theodore. "She's signaling them," he growled. The rebels around him cursed as realization spread. They'd been fed lies since the moment she offered her bargain. Has been all along. The betrayal burned worse than the smoke in his lungs. He'd known, hadn't he? Known, but let hope blind him. Another pattern of lights flickered from a different window. Answering signals sparked from the darkness beyond the burning fields. Abigail had played them perfectly, keeping the militia informed of their every move while pretending to help. "Let her burn with her mansion," Matilda spat, pulling at his arm. "We need to move." She was right. Already the smoke was thinning in places, and the militia would soon regroup. The rebels pushed on through the night, the glow of burning cotton lighting their way north. Behind them, the fire consumed everything: fields, fences, barns. The very chains of their bondage melted in the inferno. Children whimpered from the smoke, but none cried out. Even the smallest among them seemed to understand the need for silence. They'd been born into quiet suffering. Now they fled through quiet darkness toward a chance at freedom. The flames rose higher, devouring the world they'd left behind. There would be no going back now, no chance of mercy if they were caught. But ahead lay darkness, and in that darkness, hope. The Underground Railroad waited, if they could reach it. If they could survive the next 2 days of hard march. Josiah glanced back one last time. The plantation house was barely visible through the smoke now, its windows still flashing their treacherous signals, but the fire was climbing the walls, reaching with burning fingers toward the roof. Soon it would join everything else in ashes. The manor house stood like a burning giant against the smoke-stained sky. Flames licked up its white columns, turning them black and twisted. The grand windows that had watched over the plantation for generations now glowed orange, like demon eyes in the night. Abigail's screams pierced through the roar of the fire. She appeared at an upper window, her son Theodore clutched against her chest. Her pale face glowed in the firelight, terror replacing her usual careful composure. "Help us! Please!" Her voice cracked with desperation. "Someone help!" Josiah stood in the yard below, the pistol heavy in his hand. The same weapon that had killed her husband now witnessed her fate. Around him, rebels paused in their escape, drawn by her cries. Some looked to him, waiting for orders. Theodore's small face pressed against the window glass, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his cheeks. He was innocent, as Abigail had claimed, but she had used that innocence as a shield while she betrayed them. "Please," she screamed again. "My son! Save my son!" Smoke poured from the lower windows now. The grand staircase must be burning, trapping them upstairs. The house groaned as timbers shifted in the heat. Soon the roof would collapse. Matilda grabbed Josiah's arm. "We can't stay here," she urged. "The militia will follow the fire." He knew she was right. Every moment they delayed put more lives at risk. Lives of people who had trusted him to lead them to freedom. People who hadn't betrayed that trust. "Josiah!" Abigail pressed her hands against the glass. "You're not a murderer. You're better than this." A bitter laugh escaped his throat. How many times had she and her kind decided exactly what he was? A piece of property. A beast of burden. Less than human. Now she appealed to his humanity, but only to save herself. The fire reached the window beside her, making her shrink back. Theodore started crying, the sound muffled by the thick glass. The boy's fear cut through Josiah's anger, making him hesitate. Samuel tugged at his sleeve. "We could try the ladder from the stable," the boy suggested quietly. "Maybe just for Theodore?" But the stable was already burning, and the ladder would be ash by now. Even if it wasn't, trying to save them would take precious time they didn't have. Time that would cost rebel lives. "Move out!" Josiah ordered, his voice rough from smoke. "Everyone, now! Head north like we planned." "You can't leave us!" Abigail's fists pounded on the glass. "Please, I'll do anything." Josiah turned his back on her cries. "Thomas leads," he called to the rebels. "Matilda takes the rear. Stay together. Stay quiet. Anyone falls behind, help them up." The rebels moved like shadows through the smoke, helping the elderly, carrying children. They'd practiced this in whispers for days, planning their escape route. Now it happened in terrible silence, broken only by Abigail's desperate screams. A crash came from the house, part of the roof caving in. The sound was followed by a high, terrified wail that could only have come from Theodore. Josiah's steps faltered. "Don't," Matilda warned, seeing his hesitation. "Her kind never showed us mercy. Never showed our children mercy." She was right. How many slave children had been sold away with no regard for their terror? How many mothers had screamed for their babies, only to be ignored? The memories hardened his heart. More of the roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Sparks flew up into the night sky, dancing like fireflies before dying in the darkness. The screams from the house grew fainter, muffled by the roar of flames. Josiah forced himself forward, following his people through the night. The pistol swung at his hip with each step, a constant reminder of how this had started. One shot in anger had lit a fire that would burn away everything, their chains, their fear, and now the woman who had tried to chain them again. They pushed through a gap in the fence, the wooden rails already starting to smoke from the heat. Beyond lay open fields, then forest. Somewhere in those trees waited people who would guide them north, if they could reach them, if Abigail's signals hadn't already warned every patrol for miles. Behind them, the mansion's walls began to crack and buckle. The grand house that had stood as a symbol of their oppression was eating itself alive, consuming the last of the Rawlins family in its hunger. The flames rose higher, as if reaching for the stars themselves. The rebels moved steadily into the darkness, their faces lit only by the distant fire. No one looked back now. They had all seen enough death, caused enough death. What happened in the burning house was just one more horror in a long chain of horrors. Smoke stung Josiah's eyes as they pushed on through the night. Or maybe they were tears. He couldn't tell any more, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the path ahead, the people depending on him, the hope of freedom that pulled them forward like a lifeline. The fire's light faded as they moved deeper into the darkness. Its roar grew distant, replaced by the sound of crickets and night birds. Nature itself seemed to hide their passage, the shadows wrapping around them like a protective cloak. Soon, the only light came from the stars overhead, the same stars that had guided runners to freedom for generations. Josiah led his people toward those stars, away from the inferno that had once been Rawlins' plantation. Behind them, the past burned. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the chance of a future without chains. The forest wrapped around them like a protective blanket, thick branches hiding their passage from searching eyes. Josiah led the group through the undergrowth, his feet finding paths where others saw only wilderness. Behind him stretched a line of exhausted rebels, men, women, and children who had walked through the night and day without rest. Children rode on strong shoulders, their small heads nodding with exhaustion. The wounded limped forward, supported by friends who refused to leave anyone behind. Old Martha, her face lined with decades of plantation work, leaned heavily on young Timothy as they walked. Their progress was slow, but steady. Looking back, Josiah could still see smoke rising from the horizon where Rawlins' plantation had stood. The dark column twisted against the sky like a snake, marking their trail of destruction. Some of the rebels glanced back too, their faces showing a mix of satisfaction and fear at what they'd done. "There," Matilda called softly, pointing ahead. "That clearing looks defensible." Josiah studied the space she indicated. High ground, thick trees for cover, a small stream nearby. More importantly, it was far enough from any road to give them warning if patrols approached. He nodded, and word passed quietly down the line to halt. The rebels settled into the clearing with practiced quiet. Months of plantation life had taught them to move without sound, and now that skill served their freedom. Children were set down gently. The wounded eased onto soft grass. Samuel immediately organized the younger ones to gather water from the stream, moving with the quiet efficiency that had made him such a good scout. "How far north, Josiah?" Timothy asked, helping Martha sink down against a tree trunk. "How much further to real freedom?" Others gathered close to hear the answer, hope and exhaustion warring on their faces. Josiah pulled out a crude map he'd pieced together from Abigail's papers and stories he'd heard over the years. "There's a network," he explained, tracing the path with his finger. "People who help runners like us. Some are black, some white, all risking their lives to guide folks north. We find them. They'll help us reach free soil. There's a Safeway station 2 days north, a river landing where conductors meet runners and ferry them to the next house. But how will we know who to trust?" someone asked. "There are signs," Matilda spoke up. "Quilts hung certain ways, lanterns in windows. My grandmother told me stories before they sold her north." A pregnant woman named Rachel shifted uncomfortably against her husband's shoulder, her face tight with pain. She was close to her time, something that had worried Josiah during their flight. They needed rest, all of them, but especially her. Samuel returned from the stream, his face serious with responsibility. "No signs of pursuit," he reported, "but I saw deer tracks. Means good hunting if we need it." Josiah nodded approval, and the boy's face lit up. Despite everything they'd been through, Samuel's youth still showed in moments like these. He settled near Josiah's feet, looking up with curious eyes. "What's it going to feel like?" Samuel asked. "Being free?" The question silenced the quiet conversations around them. Everyone turned to hear the answer, as if Josiah held some special knowledge of liberty. He thought carefully before speaking. "It feels like this," he said finally. "Walking with no chains, no overseer watching, no whip waiting, just the sky above, and your own feet choosing the path." "But we're still running," Samuel pointed out. "Yes," Josiah admitted, "but we run as free people now. Every step takes us further from slavery. Every mile belongs to us." A cry from Rachel interrupted them. Her husband, John, called urgently for help. The baby was coming, ready or not. The women quickly organized themselves, creating privacy with hung blankets, while Matilda, who had helped birth dozens of plantation babies, took charge. Hours passed. The men kept watch while the women attended Rachel. Children slept, their small bodies curled together like puppies. The forest grew dark, but they dared not light fires. Only the stars provided light, countless bright points piercing the canopy above. Rachel's labor pains grew stronger. Her muffled cries carried through the clearing, but no one complained. This birth was different from the plantation births they'd known. This child would be born free. Near midnight, a new cry split the air, the first wail of a newborn. The sound sent shivers through the rebels. They'd heard babies born before, but never one born to freedom. The cry seemed stronger, more defiant. Matilda emerged from behind the blankets, her face glowing. "A girl," she announced, "strong and healthy." A quiet cheer went through the group. Rachel's husband wept openly, cradling his wife and daughter. The baby's cries softened to quiet gurgles as she nursed for the first time. Later, as the others slept, Josiah sat beneath the stars. The pistol that had started everything rested across his lap, its weight familiar now. Rachel's daughter slept in his arms, wrapped warmly against the night air. Her small face was peaceful, unaware of the history she represented. "You're the proof," he whispered to her. "Proof that chains can be broken. Proof that we were meant to be free." The baby stirred slightly, tiny fingers flexing in sleep. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient paths, the same stars that had guided generations of runners toward freedom, the same stars that would guide them now. Josiah stood carefully, mindful of his precious burden. He lifted the child toward those stars, his arms steady and strong. Behind them, smoke still stained the horizon, marking their violent path to liberty. But ahead, the stars beckoned with promise, leading north toward a future without chains. The newborn's face glowed in the starlight, as if the heavens themselves blessed her free birth. She was their newest rebel, their youngest freedom fighter, born into liberty because they had dared to seize it. The night wrapped around them like a promise, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, safety waited. They would find it together, as free people, carrying their youngest toward that dream of freedom. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.